Tonight, we welcome Marlene Daut, who is professor of French and African Diaspora Studies at Yale University. She teaches courses in Anglophone, Francophone, Caribbean, African American, and French colonial and historical studies. Some of her previous books include Tropics of Haiti, Race and the Literary History of the Haitian Revolution in the Atlantic World in 2015, and Awakening the Ashes, an intellectual history of the Haitian Revolution, which was awarded the 2024 Frederick Douglass Book Prize from the Gilder Lehrman Center for the Study of Slavery, Resistance, and Abolition. Tonight, she will be speaking with us about her fascinating and deeply researched new study, The First and Last King of Haiti, The Rise and Fall of Henry Christophe. She will be joined in conversation by Grace L. Sanders Johnson, who is an historian, visual artist, and associate professor of Africana Studies at the University of Pennsylvania. Her areas of study include modern Caribbean history, transnational feminisms, oral history, and environmental humanities. Her most recent work can be found in several journals, and she is the author of White Gloves, Black Nation, Women, Citizenship, and Political Wayfaring in Haiti. That's from UNC Press in 2023, which won the 2023 Haitian Studies Association Best Book Award and honorable mention for the 2024 Mary Nicholas Prize in U.S. Women's and/or Gender History from the Organization of American Historians. I know you are all looking forward to this conversation as much as I am. Please join me in welcoming Marlene Daut and Grace L. Sanders Johnson.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm really excited tonight. Marlene and I have been passing like ships for maybe a decade.
Yeah, absolutely. We've never met.
We've never
in
met.
person.
Except we know each other's work. Mm-hmm. We're around all of the same people. Mm-hmm. So this is really exciting to be able to have this conversation. I admire your work in so many ways, but this book is outstanding. Have you all read the book? Okay, maybe you haven't read the book, but I'm telling you, do not be daunted by the 500 pages. Because it is a fast read, which is something that I don't think anyone ever says about history texts.
I'll take it. That's a nice compliment. Thank you.
But it's an excellent book. As a historian, it is just a work of art in terms of how you navigate the archive, and exciting. And I'm excited for so many people to read it, but also to have this conversation with you today.
Well, I'm really excited to have this conversation also, because I feel like I've been fangirling you. I loved your book so much, and I was just so delighted that you agreed to have this conversation and engage in dialogue with me about it.
It's my honor for honestly a true honor. So there are two unexpected characters in this book. So spoiler alert. The first, I guess, character that was a little unexpected for me was Baron Vastey, mm-hmm. Who was Henri Christophe's secretary and biographer, as well as the subject of one of your other books. Mm-hmm. And so in some ways, maybe it shouldn't have been a surprise, mm-hmm. but I think what was most a surprise about his presence in the book was how central he was to your understanding of this story. So that's the first unexpected character in the book. But the other unexpected person in the book was you. Oh. Because you begin each chapter with a reflection on Christophe's life, and also you provide this refreshing and intentionally different, I think, engagement as a biographer of a life. And so I would like for us to start with you, and for you to give us a sense of what your conversation was with Henri Christophe. How did this journey start? Because you all are a pair in this text.
Yeah, oh, thank you so much for that. Really engaging way to think about it. I love when there's new questions I get and like about unexpected characters in the text. So yeah, I'll start with, I do feel like I've been on a journey of learning about Henri Christophe for a really long time, not just because it took a long time to write the book, but also because as a scholar of Haiti, he was someone who appeared often. He's always there in terms of texts that are talking about the Haitian Revolution, in tons of fictional texts, but he seemed to me one of the least known people at the same time as he's kind of omnipresent. And I really wanted to get to the bottom of understanding who he was, his motivations, and how he became king of Haiti. So one of the kind of stock phrases is that he made himself king of Haiti. And again, spoiler alert, when you read the book, well, not exactly. I mean, I guess in the same way that any other person makes themselves king by accepting the crown to be king, but no, there's a different story and there's a different process there. And so I really, when I was sort of deep in the archival part of the research, which also involved going back to Baron Vastey's writings and looking for clues in his writings about Henri Christophe, I did feel like I was sort of in a dialogue with Christophe where I kind of just said to him, I think I may have said it at one point to a portrait of him that is housed at the University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras campus in the Alfred Nemours archive. You know, I'm gonna tell the best story that I can. I'm gonna try to get it right. Mm-hmm. I can't promise, it might not be a flattering story all the time, but it's not gonna be a demonization or a caricature or a romanticization.
Yeah.
And so that's really, and Baron Vastey, that was a hard interlocutor to have also.
Yes.
Because I knew that he had one perspective. So I talk about, I have to counterbalance. Mm-hmm. I have to counterbalance what he's saying against other evidence and other people's tales that also mattered, their tales about the king.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I mean, one of the things that you're talking about in terms of creating that balance, it seemed that you, as a historian, it can be tempting to go in a direction with a character, right? You know more probably than they even know about themselves, or at least you've thought about them more than they've thought about themselves. And when you spend that much time with someone, excuse me, you can either start to have an affinity towards them, you can maybe start to have a desire to defend them. And what's so beautiful about this text is you're really balancing that defense alongside that genuine critique of who this person is as you're trying to battle this archive that is extremely biased as you share with us as we read. Along those lines, though, you do say at one point that unlike traditional biographers, you, quote, felt it necessary to use your voice to intervene in this story. Can you talk more about this decidedly forward-facing intention to intervene and speak directly to other archival documents or speak directly to moments that you thought were inaccurate?
Yeah, for this, I'll say I was really influenced by investigative journalism.
Listen, it read like, that's my next question. You're already there. Yes.
Backstage, they asked me, for a little social media clip, what was a great book I read recently, and I said, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks.
Yeah.
As an amazing piece of investigative journalism,
Yes.
right? And I was really influenced by the way that investigative journalists can pull the reader into the process of writing the story.
Yes, you did that beautifully.
They're telling you, these events, they happened. Can we find the truth of them? We don't know. Mm-hmm. And that is very different from a lot of the ways that, when you read a New York Times book review of a biography, it's going to say it's the definitive biography.
Exactly.
It's like, well, first of all, that's not how history works.
It's not how
but
history
it's also
works.
not how life works.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the really great pieces of investigative journalism break that third wall, taking the reader behind the scenes and saying, here's this person, and this is the way they experienced this. Mm-hmm. Here's this other person, and they experienced it like this. Mm-hmm. And the truth is somewhere in there, but it's actually okay if we don't know and we don't get to pronounce upon it. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I also wanted to do. In those moments where I say, these are conflicting stories. Mm-hmm. Here's a story that seems more logical and likely, but we can't say for sure. And I feel that we need to leave room for other interpretations, to not, I set out saying, this is not the definitive biography. I don't think you can write the definitive biography, especially when someone's life was so devalued, having been most likely formerly enslaved, that their earliest, barest years are not recorded. Things that for most people are just the simplest part of their life, where they were born, what their birth date is, who their parents are.
Yeah.
And we didn't have that information for him.
It's certainly something that was communicated in the text, right? It was almost painful at some points to read the first part of the book because you're going through Christophe's life with such little information. I mean, the fact that there's almost a full chapter and we still don't actually know where Christophe is born, right? I mean, you kind of come to the conclusion that it's Grenada, right? Based on your relationship to the documents and your reading. But the fact that that is possibly unknown, right, or that there's some uncertainty about that communicates just the vulnerability of Christophe's early life and all the stories we think we know. You really help us to understand the precarity of what it means to exist in the 18th century. For him, the early 19th century. And so I just want to honor that practice that you really took us through, to not be beholden to a truth, right, or one story. Along those lines, this text read like an unsolved mysteries novel / missing persons report. And I think as a historian, one of the things I'm curious about is how you manage that uncertainty. I started tracking, because I'm a data collector, as we all are. I started tracking how many times you said perhaps, right? And how as historians we can become uncomfortable with language like maybe, perhaps, right? But it happens so often, and how that language was a through line of the text. Can you just talk a little bit more about what it means to have so much missing from a historical figure, and when you decide to keep going and say perhaps this could happen, or when you just left a moment as it is, right? Because there were moments where you dug deep for a name, right? And other moments where you said, listen, I can't go any further with this. This is what we have. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, you know, in that opening chapter where I'm talking about his life on Grenada, I actually, you know, I had to come at it through kind of I had to make the beginning the end, which is the conclusion that he's born on the island of Grenada, because here I am going through the Grenadian National Archives held by the British Library, and then also recently digitized. I'm looking for like, oh, maybe, just in case, let me go through this. But then I realized one of Christophe's most important accomplishments and contributions is the print culture that he created through the printing press of the Kingdom of Haiti and the writers he encouraged and essentially sponsored.
Exactly.
And so when Baron Vastey is telling us Christophe is born on the island of Grenada and here's his exact birth date, I had to think about it not as all the European writers before who discounted Vastey and said, oh, he's just a propagandist, we can't trust anything he says. I had to think about it from, here's someone whose life wasn't recorded, but wanted their life to be recorded.
Yes.
So in that vein, I can't say Baron Vastey's information isn't true, since he's writing, he's the official historian, he's writing on behalf of the king. His job as the official court historian is literally to write down the history of everything that is happening and the word he uses is for posterity's sake, because he knows that it's being demonized, the revolution and Christophe, as he speaks, as he writes. And so there were certain things where I felt like that I needed to start with all of the people who are saying conflicting information and showing, you know, why this is problematic, and then to come back and say, but here's something that's actually pretty easy to understand, which is someone saying, I can't produce my baptismal certificate for you. It's not in the parish register. I don't have access to it, but this is where I was born.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to honor that.
Yeah.
But then, as you said, there were other moments where I said, you know, Henri Christophe's wife, for example, the name, the family name that
was
comes.
a beautiful part of the book.
Thank you. I trace her family name, which is a different family name. I won't give you the spoilers, but then the one that if you were to, for example, Google Marie-Louise, Queen Marie-Louise, you would get the last name Croix David. But I didn't solve that mystery of who exactly were, and I also didn't want to pronounce. I found her mother, the stepfather, but who is her father? Well, it's most likely the man with this other name, but or her mother's last name, but her mother was written about without a last name, as so many free women of color were at that time. And so I said, to other researchers, I leave this here for you. I hope maybe it will spark something. I even think people in Haiti who they see it and they say, I know.
I know that name.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Yeah. I think that was actually something that was quite beautiful about how you navigated. As historians, I imagine people think that we deal with dates all the time, but not everyone deals with dates as preciously or with the care that you dealt with dates. Because even in your verification, one of the things that you offered for us as readers, okay, let's look at all of this information. Was this person alive while Christophe was alive? Right? Would they have been able to have a one-on-one with this person? Is that an eyewitness account? Or is this kind of perpetuating a propaganda that was serving a larger agenda? And so for a moment, I just want to help our audience and others think about what those agendas were. Because visually, what it felt like is that there are mounds and mounds and mounds of articles and essays and letters that are vilifying Christophe globally, and that there are kind of a few voices where we're getting a sense of who this person is that varies in any way from this mound and mound of data. And what you present to us is that this is not just a conversation about Christophe. This is really about the global system that is evolving. Can you talk to us a little bit about the significance of Christophe as kind of a point person for navigating other conversations in the region?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was kind of astonishing to me to read through this vast historical writing about the Haitian Revolution and also about Christophe or about 19th century Haiti, which were usually kind of hit jobs on 19th century Haiti. And that a lot of historians said, oh, well, we don't know this or that because this person says this and this one says that. But as you mentioned, this is someone who knew him, who was there, which has to, account for something. Right? Because in investigative journalism, you wouldn't just take the word of somebody who wrote about it 30 years later, who hated that place, who was a pro-slavery apologist.
Yeah.
And so wrote that Christophe was the worst tyrant the world had ever seen and re-enslaved the Haitian people, and all the enslavers of Great Britain were far more benevolent. It's we can clearly see the agenda here, right?
Yeah.
And so that in so doing also they're discounting writers who were writing in this vein,
Yes.
Christophe's role in those larger kind of geopolitical conflicts in which he was actually winning, right? When the Bourbon Restoration happens, when Napoleon is forced to abdicate his throne the first time, at first in the Kingdom of Haiti they think, oh, that horrible tyrant, childish Napoleon is gone, the adults are back in the room, Haiti's going to finally get some respect. But King Louis XVIII, brother of Louis XVI, the beheaded king, he actually starts trying to plot to, quote unquote, restore Saint-Domingue, which means to bring back slavery and restore French control over the island. And Christophe is able to thwart his efforts 2 times, because when Napoleon comes back for his 100 days, this also contributes to the failure, but when he comes back the second time, the King of France starts trying to do it again.
Yes.
And it's astonishing to watch as in the US press in the North, in the British press, they're saying, this king is delusional if he thinks that the people of Haiti are not going to fight him, and if he thinks they literally don't mean independence or death, this is delusional. And to watch the press kind of turn against France and argue on the side of Christophe, which is not the story that we usually get of early 19th century Haiti.
Exactly.
They're isolated, everyone's against them, demonized, and certainly there were pro-slavery texts, as I'm mentioning, that were definitely working hard in this vein. But Christophe wins the court of public opinion in the northern US and in Great Britain, in London, not in Jamaica. And there's an interesting story about what happens to Baron Vastey's writings when a man takes them to Jamaica, where he gets arrested for sedition for having these pamphlets. But at the same time, I wanted to show that Christophe wasn't willing to be bullied. He actually institutes at one point a trade embargo against France because they keep trying to reconquer the island. So he says, okay, well then we'll just bar your ships from coming in our vicinity.
Yeah, I think that was such an important part of the book, to really think about Christophe not as how a caricature of a king, but actually a leader, and a global leader who is, at a moment where there's so much volatility, is able to actually maintain and create some kind of stability in the country, and gain the respect, as you say, at least of northern neighbors. Speaking of those northern neighbors, we are here in Philadelphia, and this is a city that is known as one of the founding cities of the nation through the Constitution. And there's a lovely series of stories that you tell about Christophe's relationship to the American Revolution. And even that, I was reading that like, what? That's not true? There's a possibility that didn't happen? And so can you tell us a little bit about how you discovered or are thinking Henri Christophe ends up in Savannah, Georgia, fighting through the French military against the British in the American Revolution, and what that means as kind of a foundational moment for his international politics?
Yes, so one of the reasons that I had to go really deeply in the book into the Grenada story is because it is completely connected to the Savannah story.
Yes.
And it starts to make a lot of sense when you think the Comte d'Estaing, who's the French general who leads the Battle of Savannah on the French side, he leads, prior to that, just a few months prior, a siege on the island of Grenada, which had been in British hands. And now he reconquers it briefly for the French and takes a bunch of prisoners, some of whom are young children, enslaved people, whom they intend to sell when they arrive to Saint-Domingue. But some of them escape, stow away. We don't know how Christophe got on that ship as it was leaving Saint-Domingue to go to North America, to the shores of Savannah, where he is depicted as a drummer boy, but I kind of go through that.
Yeah.
There's a monument to the chasseurs volontaires, who are the free men of color from Saint-Domingue, who fought in that October 1779 battle. Christophe is depicted as a drummer boy because he would have only been 12 years old at the time of the battle. And I talk in the book about what he was most likely doing was actually digging trenches, because that's what the chasseurs volontaires were largely doing. And this was a really bloody battle for the French and American patriots. They lose this battle. There's a lot of casualties, and when they disembark, it's completely disorganized. And so there are moments when Christophe is fighting during the Haitian Revolution that I think, oh, there's some parallels here. It seems like some of his decisions, whether or not they were informed by what happened in Savannah, some of his decisions had this kind of uncanny parallel. For example, when the Comte d'Estaing is asked for, by the British general in charge for, like a stay, a ceasefire for a little bit, let me decide if I'm gonna surrender the city to you, which is really a ruse. And this is what allows the British to succeed. Later, the French soldiers who keep journals say that was the moment that that paved the way to lose the battle. When Christophe is fighting and leading an army during the Haitian Revolution against French forces, at one point they say, oh, can you give us, just like a day, 24 hours to consider your request that we surrender this position? And he says, nope, and attacks it. And they say, oh, he's horrible, tyrant, he didn't, wait, and this has not happened anywhere in the world. They're very hyperbolic about him attacking them. And I did wonder, well, he's already been through a time.
He's seen it already.
He's seen this already. He knows how that story ends. And for him, the person who got the glory from the Battle of Savannah, even though lost, was the French general, not the chasseurs volontaires. But now there is that monument to remind people, if you ever go to Savannah in Franklin Square, there's a huge monument there.
I think one of the things that stood out about that story as well is that you have us think, as you do multiple times throughout the book, as Christophe as a person who is hurt and is engaging in a life that is constantly informing his worldview around really painful things. So, not least of which is enslavement. But even in that scene, we're talking about, as you tell us, a 12-year-old, an 11-year-old possibly when he first arrives, who is witnessing people die en masse, right? And he's also isolated from his family. He doesn't know anyone. And so you even bring up a moment of like, what does PTSD for this child feel like when they are being constantly removed from places that may have been considered home? And I just thought that was a beautiful, throughout the book you do that, is really humanize him for us so that we can imagine that there's a lot of heartache in this person who's trying to lead and find his way. Along the idea of finding his way, after coming back to Saint-Domingue, Christophe has to figure out his way in the world. And it's a really important history to understanding how he moves from someone who is formerly enslaved to being king. And we see through your research these relationships that possibly started in Savannah, where he's able to move up the social ladder. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you witnessed in his character in those early years before the revolution started?
Yeah, it's remarkable to think that, you know, of all the places he could have gone in the Caribbean after Savannah, he ends up on Saint-Domingue, which already has the reputation of being this horribly cruel slave colony. Yes, it's the richest, you know, sugar colony, but for the enslaved people, this is a land of torture and terror. And so he ends up there, and I kind of chart what he does. Those who say he worked at this hotel called La Couronne, which is, you know, right in the heart of Cap Français, which is essentially kind of the capital of the Caribbean, if you will, with all the ships coming and going, imports, exports. You know, he's seeing everything if he's there, right? And the revolution is happening, the Haitian Revolution, before his eyes there, those conversations. And Christophe can read and write, and we know this because the French military, they're terrified of this fact. And, you know, in the book, in the images, I was so thankful to the publisher for allowing me to have 44 color images, which I think are just...
They're beautiful.
I love that they are able to be in there. There's a page with just his signatures. And if you look at a lot of documents from the 18th century, those that were signed by free people of color, if they have a shaky hand, it usually means they learn to sign later in life, and that might be the only thing that they can write is their name. Christophe does not have a shaky hand at all. The letters that he wrote are in his hand, his signature, and his signature gets more fabulous, elaborate as time goes on, to the point where, like in the early days, you could very clearly read his name, and then at once he's king. I mean, he's you know, swirling and swirling, but you see some of the swirls in the earlier signatures too. He had the idea.
He knew who he was.
He knew who he was, and that's what I wanted when I chart what he's doing, especially as he becomes more and more visible. He's a soldier, an officer in the French army. He becomes a businessman. He signs documents. He creates a company. So he's really kind of much more visible in the 1790s, mid-1790s on. And I show all of the things that he's learning how to do. When he's accused of something, he says, oh, I kept those documents. Oh, and here's some evidence. And he takes testimony of people to testify on his behalf. He's completely aware of what French officers and French generals will take into account to be able to defend himself.
Yes, I really appreciated actually your discussion of his experiences being imprisoned, because you get to see this different person who's advocating for himself, but also manipulating and playing the system a bit, very aware of what's going to be documented and how that's going to relate to his life as he moves forward. One of the things that I know this audience is probably really curious about is a good portion of the middle of the book is talking about Christophe's relationship to the revolution and the people. And one of the things that I appreciate about this text is that you really help us to see the relationships between some of the names that we're familiar with, but also some names that we're not as familiar with. So I would like for us just to talk a little bit about one of the overarching questions that I know people are wondering about, which is Christophe's relationship with Dessalines and Toussaint Louverture.
Yeah, it was also a kind of painful part of the book to write because, the story is that, Christophe, Dessalines, and Toussaint Louverture are, kind of at odds. They're vying for power. Each of them want to be in charge. They've gotten rid of André Rigaud, which is the most famous rival of Toussaint Louverture. And now, that there's a lot of kind of infighting happening and they're betraying one another. But when I had to go into the French archives. I had to read so many Napoleon letters. And those who know me know I'm not a fan. Not a fan of Napoleon. To read so many letters and to watch as he lays out the plan and tells his brother-in-law who is going to lead the expedition to restore slavery. So in that period when slavery's been abolished due to the Haitian Revolution, but the colony, it's still a French colony. And this is when Toussaint rises to be governor general. Christophe becomes a brigadier general. Dessalines is a division general. They are free black French soldiers. Officers, right? Mm-hmm. But behind the scenes, Napoleon is telling his brother-in-law, oh, and when you get there, you got to find a way to arrest Toussaint Louverture. That's the first thing you have to do. Then you've got to turn Dessalines, Christophe, Moïse, Maurepas, long list, Charles Belair of general. You got to turn them all against each other. Yeah. Then once you've sufficiently done that, first arrest Maurepas. Once you've done that, arrest Dessalines. Try to arrest Christophe last, because he seems to know what's going on and we might be able to actually manipulate him into helping us. And the reason they think that is because they know Christophe wants his son to be educated in France. Yes. And in fact, he does send his son to France, and they know that once he's done that, they have him.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that it's interesting, even your tone of voice changed just then, because it was sad to watch what I imagine for them were relationships that were they had pride in, that they were able to be strategic and be, for Christophe, obviously imagine himself to be some kind of leader. They all were living out that life, and then to see how that was so strategically picked apart, and that it was not by coincidence that they are, I don't even want to use the words turned against each other, but that their agendas are changed and are turned in a way that doesn't necessarily benefit them. You mentioned Christophe's son, and one of the through lines of this is also how Christophe's family grows during this time. One of the things I teach my students all the time is we imagine revolution, or we are popularly taught as revolution as this kind of burst of things where everything is awry and nothing is happening. And I said, no. People go to school during revolutions, they eat, they have children, they have friendships, and they care for one another. And you did a great job of not only showing us all that's happening politically, but what's happening personally for Christophe. Can you talk about him as a father?
Yeah, it's interesting. Even the people who hated him said, he was a really good father. He loved his children, which is sort of baseline, but at the same time, if their desire, there were other people who didn't know him who were inventing tales that he tried to throw his son out the window and, really crazy things. And in fact, Christophe, he learns of this story and, he laughs about it. He says, you think I'm actually going to try to, throw my son out the window? This son who's sitting right here and just he says, this plump fellow,
he said, I'm not strong enough.
How would I ever do that? To be able to do that. So he makes a joke out of the whole thing. But he is very into the education of his children. There's a part in the book where I talk about a letter that Christophe writes to his son, Victor Henri, who's the heir to the throne. And he basically says, I heard you've been being rude to your servants and your minders. And you're not allowed to do that. Mm-hmm. And also, your writing, your spelling is terrible. Your sentences are, you need to pay more attention. And one of his teachers had been his Louise, who's Christophe's wife, her brother, Noël Croix David. He unfortunately dies, which devastates Christophe and the queen. And then they go through a series of teachers who are, not strict enough with the prince. And then finally they settle on a Baron Vastey, who basically, lays down the law. But Christophe has another son, an older son from a previous relationship, Eugène, Prince Eugène, and he we have a letter from Eugène to Christophe in which he's trying to get his father's attention. He says, "Father, you know, I wrote this essay and it's about Saladin, and he's kind of like you know, and all, and he really wanted I hope it meets with your approval." And we also see, you know, Christophe wants his daughters to be educated. He says, you know, women are going to be, he has a very kind of Rousseauian, you know, 18th century understanding of, you know, maternal impression that the women need to be educated because they're the ones who are going to educate their children. They're going to be the first educators of the children before they formally go on to school. And that also trickled down to the people. At the time of his death, he was in the process of instituting a national school system at a time when that really wasn't common even elsewhere. And he had succeeded all over the North, and he was trying to recruit female school teachers because, of course, they believed, you know, female students need to be taught by women. And he was having difficulty doing that. And he was writing to William Wilberforce just before his death saying, "I'm really hopeful that you can help me find some, you know, female school teachers who might come and instruct. This is a really important part of my plan." And I think it started at home for him with his family and just really wanting his children to be educated. And he had a paternalistic attitude toward, as most kings do, that the people were all his children and he wanted them to be educated too.
I think that's an important story because when you mention Wilberforce in the book, it took me back to your other work of just thinking about Black Atlantic humanism and all of the work that was being done in Haiti that was not the same work that was being done, you know, in Europe or even in North America, that there was really an effort to have a profound shift in how leadership and governance looked in the world. I want to just go back for a minute to Mary Louise, because I think that she is a character who is less known, and the way you studied her family lineage really led you to Christophe in many ways. And so can you just talk to us a little bit about her? I also would say that I loved your thinking about Mary Louise alongside Mary Claire. And Mary Claire is Dessalines' widow. And thinking about, while we might have been told that there's this friction between these two leaders, that the wives are bound together, not only as widows, but they're bound together through this journey of revolution. And they're, in some cases, as you show us, the ones who actually tell the rest of the story. So can you tell us a little bit about the significance of Mary Louise's role in this book?
Yeah, you know, Queen Marie Louise came from a free Black family, which ends up being important because she's possessed of the kind of social capital that Christophe most likely lacks.
Yes.
Not being a part of this social world of Cap Français, of free people of color. So I can trace, you know, her stepfather, his rise in the French military as a free man of color. And we know that, you know, they were listed as, in the parlance of the day, noir or nègre, négresse. They weren't listed as mulâtre, and they were surrounded by other free Black families whose names are sort of not prominent now, but in the 18th century world of Saint-Domingue, the Grands Gens, Marie Bunel, she marries a man named Joseph Bunel, her original name was Mouton. These were the people who were innkeepers, they were hoteliers, some of them were owned plantations themselves, although it doesn't seem like Marie Louise's family did. And so he gets, through his marriage to her, introduction into this world in which he gets to be catapulted to the fore of the French military. It finds business partners, some of whom are related to her family members, and who stick around. We find traces of them in the Kingdom of Haiti as well. But as queen, you know, it was interesting because most of the writing about Marie Louise talked about her being this sorrowful widow who endured this tragedy and has to pick up the pieces, goes into exile in England first, experiences racism there, flees to Italy. They're following her around. All these sensational stories are being published about her, like paparazzi-style stories, but saying horrible things to her, just, you know, talking about her appearance, poking fun at her. One of her daughters is wearing a white dress, and this writer makes this, oh, the contrast was so garish between her skin color and the dress, just horrible stuff they're saying. And so, you know, I felt so much for her in writing this, and then I had to take a step back and say, she experienced these tragedies, but there were people who experienced those tragedies at the hands of her husband.
Yes.
And so I stop for a minute and I say, I wonder if she thought about that as she went through living in her life of sorrow, a widow, but also her sons, the Victor Henri and Eugène, who she had come to love as if he were her own son, were executed around 10 days after Christophe's death. She never got over it, of course. She never got over it. Her other son, the one who was sent to France, was left by the French in the streets to die. She suffered a lot. Yeah. But I did wonder, I wonder if she recognized that there were other people who suffered too.
Yeah, when you wrote that, I was like underlining vigorously at that moment, because I had, and this is what I would argue is the beauty of your writing, is that you gave us the story, we're presented with her as a widow, we understand all that she's experiencing, and then in the next paragraph you say, also, there were people that were killed under her husband's reign. And if she ever thought about that, if part of her life moving forward, or even perhaps her relationship with Mary Claire, that might have been something they bonded on, thinking about the losses that occurred because of their husband's leadership. We have a few more minutes before we move to our audience questions, and I just want to bring us to the present moment a little bit. There's something in the text that you talk about, and you have this beautiful quotation. We haven't even talked about the citadel or things like that. But one of the things you talk about when you are discussing the citadel is that people critiqued that structure, and you say that regarding it, that it was critics said that it was waiting for an enemy that never came. And you say, but come the enemies had, only their best weapon turned out to be imposing debt rather than firing cannons. And you talk to us about the indemnity that was posed on Haiti after independence, but something that was actually striking, which I think people don't think about, is that that was not just to the nation, but that was to individual owners. And so you talk about how individual free people of color have their properties either, they're not restored to them, right? And so that wealth that you might imagine that French owners had does not go to those families. As we think about that, I really want us to think about, if you can say a little bit about this current moment, right? Because what the text does is have us critically engage. As historians, we're trying not to silo the past in the past, that it can actually inform and help us think about the present. So in terms of leadership, in terms of that, what you call the scheme around this debt, what might you say this text can help us understand for this current moment?
Yeah, the indemnity that Haiti's president, Jean-Pierre Boyer, was forced to agree to pay France as the price of freedom, kind of bookends the book, because Christophe, this question existed during Christophe's reign, and he rejected it outright. Inadmissible, that's the word that his administrators used. Absolutely not, So many of his writers were just, they had the best responses about this. Like, why would we pay them? If anyone owes anyone money, they would owe us money. They are very clear about this. And when Christophe dies, Boyer, he's in power, and at first, he is trying to negotiate with France for how they can recognize Haitian sovereignty. But Louis XVIII wants nothing to do with that at all. It's not until his brother Charles X comes to power that the indemnity agreement really, kind of picks up momentum, and unfortunately in 1825 it's signed, and then there's this debt. And so in thinking about the importance and what we can learn from Christophe's reign is also that, he really was not prepared to compromise Haitian sovereignty, even if it meant that that Haiti would lose out on certain things. For example, trade with France. Haiti's greatest trading partner at the time was Great Britain, but of course it could have been even greater if they had France, and France is dangling this before them. But the price was literally too steep. And so when I look, today and I see the successive, compromises to Haitian sovereignty, the question I always think about is, you know, why didn't they just say no? Because when Boyer is overthrown in 1843, if you can imagine the counterfactual for a moment, the next president who comes along could say, I didn't agree to this.
Yeah.
Why did you agree? Because the argument that Haitians made as soon as they really began to understand the indemnity agreement was, he made that agreement. He
Yes.
can't force us into this. What authority does he have? And so it kind of blows my mind that leader after leader after leader, all the way into the 20th century, recognized this debt as legitimate and paid out of fear
Yes.
of being isolated, out of fear of being invaded, which literally then happened
Happens-
in 1915.
And then
I'm
pick
in
up-
your period.
Exactly.
I know. Now we
and
pick
then
up.
you pick up on my period.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was such a powerful understanding of understanding what Christophe did in terms of keeping that at bay for so long, and even having us interrogate why these payments keep going out over time, which for those of you all who don't know, ultimately ended up being somewhere between 20 billion and $115 billion of debt. There is no nation in what would be then the modern world who would have that degree of debt going into a new nation being established. So I think now we're gonna open it up to the audience. This was so wonderful. I have a whole nother page of questions, but it's okay because I know you all have some fantastic questions.
Free to direct me.
Yes.
I thought this was a fantastic conversation.
Thank
you.
you so much.
Really, really, really amazing. And the book, haven't finished it, but it's fantastic. I'm the guy that's going to be showing the film at Yale on Sunday.
Oh, nice to
And I
we'll
thank
talk,
you,
yeah.
okay, for your support. But I have a personal question. I love the way you demonstrated how you went into the archives, but I also found the name Daut, D-A-U-T, in there. So it's a personal question. Are you Haitian? Is that your background? Because when I saw it, I went like that. So
I am Haitian. On my mother's side, my mother was born in Port-au-Prince, and she came here when she was almost 13 years old. My father is not Haitian. My last name is actually pronounced Daut, and the person in the book with the same last name, who's one of the Haitian revolutionaries, signer of the Haitian Constitution, so a Haitian Declaration of Independence, excuse me. So I get this a lot because every Haitian knows this man's name,
I thought the same thing. I was like, oh, that's your family.
So I get this question a lot. It is highly unlikely. I'm doing the genealogy on my mom's side. I haven't gotten to my dad's side, but it would be highly unlikely. But I get the question a lot. And I will say, because that person in the book has also a tragic end. You know, my name is unusual. It's not common. So I did feel some type of way, even though I'm pretty sure it's not any kin of mine. But I felt a little pain there for him.
Any other questions? Thank you so much for your question. Yes.
Thank you, and I echo this gentleman's comments. It's really just a pleasure. I have a question around your research process. So you alluded to in the very beginning about going to Grenada and just sort of, are there other sort of interesting places that this took you to in your research? It sounds like you had to do a lot of research.
Yes, I will clarify. I didn't go to Grenada because the archives are in the British Library, the ones that But I was supposed to go to Grenada, but COVID and many things started happening, but that is still definitely on my bucket list for many, many reasons. But yes, my research also did, the nature of where the archives are for studying this time period means I'm in France, I'm in England, corresponding with people in Scotland, one of archivists and librarians, because the doctor who Christophe had at the end of his life, a man named Duncan Stewart, was from Scotland. There's stuff all over the United States, so the Georgia Historical Society And actually right here, actually the Historical Society of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, it was in there. I noted it.
And there's a lot of stuff in there, and I had a lot of help from them during the COVID era, in person, but also corresponding with wonderful people there, very, very helpful. The American Philosophical Society as well. And Italy was one of the less likely places, and it was because I went to go and visit Queen Marie-Louise's tomb in a church that she helped to fund. She paid a lot of money, and they have their own little sacristy in this tiny little church in Pisa, Italy. And the church was bombed during World War II, but then reconstructed, and the sacristy thankfully remains with their tombs. She had her daughters buried there, and she herself buried there as well. There's actually now a plaque in the square, thanks to the efforts of a scholar named Myriam Franchina. There's a plaque in the last square in the Piazza Carrara, where her last known residence was. And there's also a plaque on Weymouth Street in London, where Marie-Louise lived, thanks to Nicole Wilson. So scholars have been doing a lot of work to make sure that there's sites of commemoration around this important people in this story.
And I just want to echo what everybody said about just being very impressed by your research and your findings. I'm Haitian as well. I was born and raised in Haiti. And for me, it means a lot to be here tonight because, you know, for me personally, I've struggled a lot with you know, this notion of identity. Like, I know who I am and I know where I come from, but you talk a lot about the tension between the perception of Haitians and where they quote unquote belong in the world, particularly with, you know, friends, and it's just still something that we grapple with, you know, as Haitians. Like, how can we, you know, stand for what we believe, but then surmount this, what feels like incredible mountain and, you know, of bias and judgment. So I still feel that even now, there's a lot of relevance to, you know, what we're going through.
Yeah, you know, it's cyclical. It's never ending, but there seem to be like upsurges. And so, you know, throughout the entire time of writing this book, you know, there are various moments in which Haiti is coming back into the frame of popular discourse, and it's like a one-note Haiti. So of course, you know, there was the assassination of Haiti's president, but even before that, during the Petrol Caribe protests, and then, you know, just always the kinds of stories don't really change. And so for me, doing this work is also about the story of Haiti is so much more than the picture that you would get if you only knew about Haiti from the media, from the mainstream media. You know, I meet people all the time who, when I tell them, oh yeah, I'm writing about the king of Haiti, like, what are you talking about? You know, start describing the palace, which we did get to talk at Sanssouci, his carriages, the citadel, the kind of, they're like, what do you mean? Haiti's like, isn't it like this poor, you know, because that's the only idea that they have. And as long as we live in a media environment where there's only can be one note about Haiti, because that's the note that they think sells cynically, you know, it's hard to break through that, but I think, you know, we keep on just writing and telling these stories because, you know, that's how we have a book like this, actually, is because Baron Vastey and Julien Prévost and Just Chanlat and the Haitian historians kept writing, even though they also lived in a world in which their interlocutors were saying in book reviews at the time, in their era, these are propagandists, they're, you know, we can't trust what they say, when the real propagandists were the very people saying that.
Exactly.
And discounting their writing, and yet they wrote it anyway, because they had faith that, you know, one day someone will read these words.
One day you would come along. Well, I think that's actually all the time we have. I just wanted to give a huge round of applause
Thank you.
to Marlene Daut.
No, thank you.
This work is outstanding. And I know that we might be in a time where we might not read all of a book or we might not get all the way through it, but I really encourage you to get through this book. It's not only an example of Haiti, and we didn't even talk about this, but you know, one of the things that we're in the genre or the generation of really going beyond these exceptional one-note moments. And this book is exceptional and really puts an entire new vision of not just Haiti, but also the world at this moment. And that's what you've done. You've really given us a world history in this text.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for this work and your effort.
Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it.
And a reminder that copies of this incredible book are for sale up in the lobby, and Marlene has kindly agreed to sign them. Before we adjourn, however, can we just have one more round of applause? What a conversation.